Okay, members, we have one additional guest introduction. If we could have your attention, members. Mr. Ting. Mr. Ting, I believe you have a guest with us. Members, please give your attention, Mr. Ting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to recognize Paula Rosetto, who is retiring today after 26 years of amazing service to our institution. She's worked both for the Assembly as well as the Senate, although we don't hold the Senate part against her. And she is moving back to her hometown of Weed, which is in Mr. Dolly's district, way up north. So she's often very familiar with all the state of Jefferson dialogue that's going on up there. We're very, very sorry to see her go. She is going back up to be a great daughter and take care of her mom as she gets a little bit older. But she's been an amazing asset to our institution. She's a huge Giants fan for all the Northern Californians, and she's probably one of the best bakers that we know. But I just wanted to ask that we just thank her for her, again, 26 years of service.
Members, we are moving to business on the daily file. Second reading. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2591, 2738, 1587 with amendments, 1986 with amendments, 2488 with amendments, 2617 with amendments, 2179 with amendments, 2216 with amendments, 2292 with amendments, 2305 with amendments, 2362 with amendments, 2099 with amendments, 2562 with amendments, 2165 with amendments, 1644 with amendments, 1760 with amendments, 2521 with amendments, 2303 with amendments, 1583 with amendments, 1741 with amendments, 1996 with amendments, 2520 with amendments, 2336 with amendments, 2116 with amendments, 2122 with amendments, 1594, 1843, 1970, 2250, 1593, 1650, 1680, 1769, 1776, 1797, 1811, 1829, 1845, 1849, 1894, 1900, 1918, 1962, 2053, 2093, 2168, 2219, 2254, 2259, 2269, 2273, 2274, 2341, 2505, 2563, 2637, 2780, 2884, 2886, 2611 with amendments, 2713 with amendments, 2153 with amendments, 2729 with amendments, 2247 with amendments, 2433 with amendments, 2533 with amendments, 1957 with amendments, 2177 with amendments, 1761 with amendments, 2529 with amendments, and Senate Bill 269.
All bills will be deemed read and amendments deemed adopted. Members, we're moving to the file. Without objection, we are going to move to take up on Senate third reading file item 103. File item 103, that's SB 93. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill 93 by Senator DeLeon and others, an act relating to the state budget to take effect immediately. Budget bill.
Mr. Santiago, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Today I'm presenting on behalf of Senate Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon and Senator Lara on SB 93. This is a critical component to a long fight that we've had in our community. For 33 years, we've had Exide dump on our community, and it's inexcusable that they've been allowed to operate for over 33 years with the temporary use permit. I happen to live in one of in the surrounding communities in Bull Heights. It's a community that I represent along with Senator Pro Tem. I'd like to thank him for his leadership in this long fight, but you've got to really understand what's going on in our communities. For about a mile and 1.7 mile radius, we have found extremely high levels of lead. We have found arsenic, and we have found, along with that, kids with high levels of lead, asthma, there's alleged birth defects, and serious health care problems. This is a long fight, and it was a priority for me when I first got into the legislature. Even when I was on the community college board and was president of it, stood through long meetings and did the long fights to ensure that we had some justice in our community. When I first got elected, this was priority 1, 2, and 3. And we fought long and hard. We put the pressure on DTSC. We put the pressure everywhere we needed to put it to ensure that we had justice in our communities. We applaud the governor's efforts on this. He's helped us to access $176 million to begin the cleanup. There are about 10,000 homes in our communities that are affected by this. A 1.7 mile radius, one of the worst crises that we've ever seen in California when it comes to environmental pollution. And this is just one step forward in helping clean up our neighborhoods. SB 93 helps to carry the appropriations and the loan framework to make this happen. I want to thank the Senate Pro Tem and everybody who's participated in this effort, and would respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you, Mr. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Santiago. Mr. Ridley Thomas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of SB 93 and thank the gentleman from East Los Angeles for bringing this forward. Colleagues, what this bill is going to help begin to address is the most insidious form of environmental racism that we've seen in Los Angeles County in the last 100 years, I would say. The dumping that occurred at a battery recycling facility in Vernon was so pervasive that it has contaminated the ground in the immediate surrounding area and has ruined air quality across the greater Los Angeles basin. Our neighbors and friends in southeast Los Angeles are immediately impacted, but they live, work, and play all across the region, and their compromised health has undermined quality of life in Los Angeles. Furthermore, their neighbors in surrounding areas are at threat as well. There are studies of intense magnitude occurring to see if this leak, as many suspect, is beyond the immediate impacted area. This is but a drop in the bucket for what we need, but I thank the gentleman from East Los Angeles, our colleagues in the Senate, and the governor for their timely addressing of this issue. It is on our watch that we have finally corrected what is a civil rights, a human rights, and an environmental catastrophe. So I thank the gentleman for bringing this forward as the floor manager. I thank the underlying authors, and I would strongly urge that this body begin correcting an institutional wrong by passing SB 93. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Ridley Thomas. Ms. Garcia, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you. Good morning, members. And for me, this is personal. This contamination is literally in my backyard. It's in the backyard of the children that play in my community on a regular basis. Children that have been told not to go outside and play, not to visit the parks, to stay indoor, and to clean on a regular basis, because that's the only solution they've had for decades now. I also want to thank the governor for the emergency appropriation. It's the first step in rectifying the contamination these communities and I've been living in, potentially for decades. Working class districts like mine are facing the situation more and more. What do we do when we discover that our homes, our air, our soil, or our water is contaminated due to bad industrial actors? Do we wait for us to go after the bad actors and hope we recoup the money for cleanup? The answer is no. We can't allow any individual to continue to be poisoned for years or decades or literally their entire lives. We must take action immediately to protect their health, no matter what the financial cost is, because the human cost is way too large. This doesn't mean we don't go after these bad actors. And we don't just go after them with civil charges, but we must hold them accountable and go after them with criminal charges. And I hope that today, as the legislature takes leadership on this issue, that the Attorney General and the LA County DA press charges against Exide for poisoning families in my backyard for so many generations. To be specific, for the last 3 decades. In the southeast of Los Angeles is not just Exide and lead. It's arsenic, perchlorate, hexavalent chromium, just to name a few. We've been stumbling upon contamination since the 70s, a reminder of our industrial heritage. While California as a whole benefits from regulations that have been developed, while cities in my district are still bearing the cost of the past era, when regulations weren't stringent enough. The contamination in these communities causes severe long-term cognitive effects, particularly in children. Many of the contaminants found are known to cause cancer, birth defects, and other reproductive harm. Last week, Jill Johnson from the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine commented on the release of data regarding the lead levels of these children. These data demonstrate an excess amount of lead in the blood of children near the Exide facility. This community has been disproportionately burdened with lead exposures for decades, and this pattern is evident in the report produced by the California Department of Health. Since any amount of lead can cause irreversible damage, this report provides further evidence that Exide has been a public health threat to the community. It's critical to reduce and prevent lead exposure to protect children's health, to protect our future's health. In these communities, children have the odds stacked against them without adding the negative effects of having to marinate in lead and other harmful contaminants for multiple years. SB 93 is the first step in giving these communities the justice they deserve. It will help get the first third of the funding we need. But it's going to take nearly $500 million, that's a conservative estimate, to clean up the affected area. And I hope that the legislature will not only vote aye today on this item, but vote aye on future bills that will guarantee we have all the funding to clean up all of the homes affected by Exide and all the other sites across the state that have been living with lead. I respectfully ask for an aye vote for myself, for the children and the families who have been dealing with this for 3 decades, who have felt like second-class citizens, who have felt like there's two Californias. Today, as a legislature, we take a stand and we tell this community that there's only one California, and it doesn't matter what your zip code is or your socioeconomic status is. You are just as important as everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Obernolte, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I rise in support of SB 93. As you've heard in the passionate remarks from our colleagues from Los Angeles, there's a very real humanitarian cost to the cleanup of this situation. However, I believe this is also good fiscal prudence for the state of California. This piece of legislation loans $177 million to the Department of Toxic Substances Control. This is structured as a loan, and in Budget Subcommittee, the department testified they expect to recover 100% of that loan from the companies responsible for this pollution. The Department of Finance is authorized to forgive part of the loan in the event that the department is unable to recover this money. But colleagues, even if they are forced to do this, I still believe that it would be a good investment for the state of California, because there is an economic cost of this situation that goes well beyond the humanitarian crisis that you've heard about. And those economic costs include homes shuttered and abandoned, businesses closed and relocated, and the spread of blight throughout Southern California. For that reason, avoidance of those costs would be worth an investment by the state of California. Colleagues, this is good, prudent fiscal policy. I urge an aye vote on SB 93 and on the companion piece of legislation, AB 118.
Thank you, Mr. Obernolte. Mr. Daly, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today in support of SB 93. I want to just mention that I spent 3 hours with my great chair, Alejo and Toxics, listening to the debate over the past decades of abuse. I am outraged at the fact that big business can somehow not go through the CEQA process, not the local elected officials and those who are supposed to be champions for environmental justice drop the ball somewhere. I would urge the AG and the DA to do something immediately to rectify the situations there. I do not want to see big business get away by diverting off into a subsidiary company and claiming bankruptcy and leaving the taxpayers holding the bag. I am going to support this legislation because my colleagues that live in those areas, and I heard the testimony, and I care about the lead poisoning that's happening to the children and the families there. But I will be dogging this issue to make sure that those who are at fault pay the bill back. So I strongly am convinced that the fact that there was some abuse of government and legislative policy there, but I stand with the people to correct the actions, and I will urge my colleagues to support this piece of legislation today.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and members. As chair of the Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee, I also rise to express my outrage along with my vice chair, Assemblymember Dolly. And I want to commend our speaker and the co-authors for bringing this measure forward, especially my colleagues from Los Angeles with the last names Santiago, Garcia, and Gomez, and our senators Lara and De Leon, who represent these areas. But this is one of the worst man-made disasters in the history of our state. And this bill will provide the much-needed funding to expedite the soil testing and the cleanup of the communities around the Exide Technologies facility in Vernon, California, which will, in the end, facilitate remediation. Over the course of decades of operation, Exide polluted the soil beneath it and thousands of homes surrounding it with high levels of lead, arsenic, cadmium, and other toxic materials. This is California's Flint, Michigan. But instead of being toxins in the water, the toxins are in the air, they're in the soil, they're in people's homes, inside and out. And if you could just imagine working towards realizing your American dream, your hard work paying off to provide your families with a home, and then the pollution turns your American dream into a nightmare. That's the reality for thousands of some of our poorest residents that they're experiencing day in and day out. And this certainly merits our full attention, our serious consideration. And just imagine what happens when a child is subject to lead exposure. Lead is a neurotoxin. It creates permanent and irreparable harm to children. It damages their IQ, their ability to communicate, their behavior. Imagine if those were your children subject to that. Imagine if these were your homes. And how outraged would you be feeling right now? Because it's not like there wasn't colleagues trying to shut this place down for years. They were. Senators De Leon and Lara for years tried to shut this place down, but our state let those families down. Our Department of Toxics let those families down. And here we are having to appropriate money for the pollution caused by the responsible party. We held a committee hearing for ESTM in January, and we learned that the homes surrounding the 1.3 to 1.7 miles around this facility were contaminated. That equates to anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 properties. Removing the lead-contaminated soil from these thousands of homes could result in the most expensive cleanup of its kind and among the largest cleanups ever conducted in the history of our country. The cost of the cleanup in and around the Exide facility is expected to be $500 million. And without this bill, just the testing alone would have taken 7 years. 7 years just to test the homes, not to mention to do the work needed to do the cleanup. This funding appropriates, and it's only the first step, as was mentioned earlier, but the grassroots organizations and the families who came in buses up to hearings in Sacramento to testify, I want them to hear us loud and clear that they are being heard today. They're being heard by this legislature, by the representatives, and by the governor through this legislation, and it should be seen as only the first phase. But this funding will expedite the cleanup around these homes. But I'm also concerned about another issue, that without an expedited CEQA process, that even though the money is allocated and appropriated, that without some expedited process to move the permits forward faster, the cleanup might take longer, and that might be unnecessary. So there is more work to be done here to move the work forward faster for these families. And I just wanted to add that this is a bill that we should all support. It advances environmental justice, but it also tells the families that their state government does give a damn, and it is committed, fully committed to cleaning this up at the earliest possible time.
Thank you for the remarks, Mr. Alejo. Reminding members to refer to other members by their geographic districts. Continuing debate, Mr. Bloom, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in that vein, I want to reflect the comments of my colleague from our colleague from Big Bear. And I rise, too, in support of SB 93. And as our colleague from Big Bear mentioned, this issue was heard in Budget Subcommittee number 3. And I want to begin by applauding the legislature and the administration for their leadership, dedication, and perseverance, and also commend their staffs for the hard work that and countless hours that have been put in on this very important issue that will help to correct an injustice that has been imposed on the people living in the community surrounding the Exide battery plant, the former Exide battery plant in the city of Vernon. But we need to remember that the work does not stop here. The funding we are authorizing today is a critical step forward, as it will allow 10,000 residences to be tested on top of the 1,200 that have already been done. It will also fund approximately 25% of the residences that we anticipate need to be cleaned. That's just what we anticipate. It's an estimate. But despite our rush to make this money available, the timeline for achieving any cleanup of the residences, most of which have led to contamination levels sufficient to be deemed a hazardous waste site, the timeline is unclear. And this is unconscionable. Hundreds of children live in these communities surrounding the former plant. As reported by the California Department of Public Health just a few days ago, many of these children, 6 years of age and younger, who are at the greatest risk for development, learning, and behavioral problems, have been found with elevated blood levels compared to other children throughout the county. Lead is a powerful neurotoxin with no, I repeat, no, safe levels of exposure. Soil testing of 500 homes in the surrounding areas that was released just a few days ago showed that 99% of those homes have lead levels that will require cleanup. This cleanup needs to proceed with all deliberate speed. And members, if we can find ways to expedite the process for building football stadiums, basketball arenas, or freeway interchanges, we must surely be able to find a way to expedite the cleanup of these residences. So again, I want to thank all of my colleagues and those who have been involved, particularly Mr. Santiago, who has been a great leader on this issue, and I look forward to continuing this work with all of you, the administration and the Senate, in the days and weeks ahead. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Mr. Cooley, you are recognized.
Colleagues, I rise in support of this bill. I do not have notable lead contamination in my area. We have closed Air Force bases. We have a rocket company. So I sort of understand what it means to live in a community where you deal with contamination issues that are of concern to people. I think this is an outstanding bill. I just note our colleague from the extreme northeast of California, the 1st Assembly District. It is important that as a body across the whole breadth of California, that we look at this situation, set a priority, move this outstanding bill forward to try to solve this extremely localized problem affecting the well-being of a distinct group of Californians. It is in the nature of our work that sometimes problems arise, and at first blush we do not see the solution. And then on this floor we sort of echo the words of a former Assemblyman, Bill Baker, who many, many years ago, commenting on a problem in Contra Costa County, alluded to the fact that, well, we don't see a solution, but 10,000 of my constituents can't be wrong. Problems arise that we may not see the solution, but our constituents know there must be some breakthrough made, some progress made, something to change the situation. This is the sort of circumstance which we face here. This is an outstanding bill, and I think it's important for our service here that we come together as a body reflecting the breadth of California to rise in support.
Thank you, Mr. Cooley. All debate having ceased on the item, Mr. Santiago, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I do appreciate all the support from my colleagues, principal co-authors, authors, and all other people who have been involved in this. But it's with heavy heart and unfortunate that I have to say that I'm not someone who has to imagine raising a child in that community, as most of you know. My child does live in that community. He does play in that community. And most who do know and have a personal relationship with me understand what my child's now going through. He now takes prednisone on bad days. He now has a mask that he uses for breathing. No father wants to go through that. And if I can do anything to ensure that no one else has to go through that, and if we can do anything, and this should be a reminder that across the state of California, we're not going to allow any environmental injustices, and particularly in colored communities. It's inexcusable that any State Department would have allowed that. It is inexcusable that any of us would stand here and let these kind of occurrences happen in any of our communities. But every day that I go home, and I've showed the picture to many of our colleagues here, there is a mask that my child wears when he has a hard time breathing. And while I'm fortunate to have health care, good health care, and while I'm fortunate that I can do something about it, I will have to explain to my child down the line who did that. But I'll also have to explain to him what we did to fight for that, so that things like this never happen in our communities. And the challenge for us here today is not only to pass this, but to ensure that this doesn't ever happen in any other community. This is a historic crisis that has happened. And while I never speak very often on the floor and don't speak for a very long period of time, for this particular issue, I do have to speak. But I also want to speak for all the thousands of kids in the communities that I represent who may not have the same quality health care access. It is inexcusable that this has happened. And I do want to thank the Senator Pro Tem's leadership on this, the governor's leadership, the Speaker's office, our colleagues who have signed on to this, our budget chair, subcommittee chair from Santa Monica, and all others who have helped us with this. Thank you, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Santiago. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 73, no 0. Measure passes.